Spontaneously, heroically, there would have been many, many more lives lost if not for the concerted effort of the members of that church.
Pastor Billy struggling with the loss.
Pray for the Mrs. Chen family and our congregation.
Diane, the church putting out a statement overnight saying that gunman lurked around the church for several hours before the shooting, strategically placing Molotov cocktails, ammunition. That's when he chained and nailed some of the doors shut. Parishioners thought that he was working security there because of a T-shirt he was wearing. That was until they opened fire. Now that suspect is going to be arraigned today here in Orange County, facing 1 charge of murder, 5 charges of attempted murder, and of course, there are that FBI hate crimes investigation as well. Diane.
All right, Matt Gutman in Laguna Woods, California. Thank you. Finland and Sweden are pushing ahead with their efforts to join NATO as tensions rise over the war in Ukraine. Finland's parliament today overwhelmingly voted to approve seeking membership in the alliance, and Sweden's foreign minister has now signed a formal application letter. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have ended their defense of the besieged city of Mariupol. Many of the last fighters have now been evacuated from the steel plant stronghold there. Senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell has the latest from Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Ukraine appearing to end its combat mission in Mariupol, seen as the heaviest fighting in this conflict, striking a deal with Russia to evacuate over 260 Ukrainian soldiers from the Avastal steel plant. The soldiers were living, fighting and dying there under a relentless siege for nearly 3 months. 53 other badly injured Ukrainian fighters were transported to the Russian-backed rebel city of Novoazovsk for medical treatment. Another 211 soldiers were to be exchanged for Russian prisoners of war. President Zelensky paying tribute, saying, "I want to stress, Ukraine needs Ukrainian heroes alive." Here in the northeast, Ukraine claiming victories outside of Kharkiv, pushing the Russians back towards the border. This comes as NATO's conducting long-planned military drills across Europe, including Estonia, with 15,000 troops from NATO members and partner countries expected to participate, including Finland and Sweden, both now intending to become full members of the alliance. Sweden's foreign minister formally signing her country's application this morning, as the Finnish parliament voted resoundingly in favour of membership. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin meeting with Russia's top allies, condemning Sweden and Finland's plans to join NATO, saying the expansion of military infrastructure over that territory will obviously call for our response. In a move likely to anger Russia, Biden inviting the leaders of Finland and Sweden to the White House Thursday for a visit.
Diane, we're on the scene of one of the many bomb blasts in Kharkiv city. As you can see, the work to try and clear the debris is well and truly underway. You really get a sense of the scale of the destruction inside this courtyard. There isn't a building around here that hasn't been blasted and heavily damaged, if not totally destroyed. And there are thousands of sites like this. But even though the war is grinding on, the Ukrainians are trying to clear up the sites, make them safe, at least clear away the debris and bring normal life back to the city. The Ukrainians, of course, now claiming military success in pushing the Russians back towards their own border, but, of course, having to concede defeat effectively in the city of Mariupol. Diane?
All right, Ian Pannell, thank you. And the FDA and Abbott Laboratories, the nation's biggest supplier of baby formula, have agreed on a plan to reopen Abbott's plant in Michigan to help ease the formula shortage here in the U.S. The FDA says it is also taking steps to make it easier to import formula not sold in the country. Ariel Reshev has the latest.
The FDA taking steps to ease the burden for families facing the dire nationwide formula shortage, but cautioning a resolution is still weeks away. The agency announcing it is moving to import brands of formula from abroad, currently not sold in the U.S.
We are seeking manufacturers from around the globe who may have available product that could meet our regulatory standards for both nutrition and food safety.
The U.S. normally produces 98% of the infant formula it consumes. Officials say those cans from overseas must undergo safety testing and will need labels with English instructions before they can be distributed. The FDA also laying out a plan with Abbott Nutrition, the largest domestic formula manufacturer, to reopen its critical plant in Michigan. The facility shut down since February after a voluntary recall and inspection by the FDA over safety concerns, dramatically stalling formula supply. Abbott saying it will take 2 weeks to restart operations and up to 2 more months to get its products onto shelves.
The biggest fear that I have is how long is this going to last?
For now, moms like Barbie Van from Oklahoma doing all she can to get her 3-month-old daughter Addison what she needs.
I am trying to exhaust every resource that I can, reaching out to friends and family in other states, asking them to please look at their local stores.
And the FDA not specifying which brands it will seek to import from overseas, only saying we are casting a broad net. The agency assuring any products that make it to store shelves here in the U.S. will have gone through rigorous safety checks. Diane.
All right, Ariel Reshef, thank you. Coming up, our ABC News Live coverage of key primary elections taking place across the U.S. today. The battles playing out between moderate and progressive Democrats when we come back. Welcome back. Voters are headed to the polls today in 5 states where primaries could set the stage for contentious midterm elections. It's a key test for former President Trump's influence over the Republican Party, and several candidates have embraced Trump's false claims about the 2020 election. Kentucky's Republican Secretary of State Michael Adams joins me live now for more on this. Secretary Adams, thanks for being here. How is your office working to make sure that the people of Kentucky have confidence in these elections?
Well, I'd say we've done two things. Number one, we've been very fair, very objective in our duties. We've improved public perception in this office by rooting out scandals that were here before I got here. And we've been very bipartisan. I've worked across party lines with our Democratic governor, Democrats around the state. So they have confidence in the Republican who's over their elections. We've also made tangible improvements. We've transitioned to paper ballots, which voters of both sides have confidence in. We've improved the security of our process. We've cleaned up the voter rolls, but we've also expanded access. I think one thing that the two parties get wrong is they either care about access or security. It's a both and thing. You can have both.
Now, to your point, during the pandemic, you and Democratic Governor Andy Beshear were heralded for your bipartisan collaboration. How has that bipartisanship continued into these primaries?
Well, we have bipartisanship baked into our system in Kentucky. We've got a bipartisan state board of elections. Every county has a bipartisan board of elections, and every single voting location by law in Kentucky has a mix of D's and R's working the polls. And so that's something that I'm real proud of. You don't see the sort of controversy in Kentucky that you see in some other states where people think the rules are rigged for one side or the other. We do this in a bipartisan fashion.
So what kind of safeguards are in place if one of the candidates does call the results into question and refuses to concede?
Well, we actually have had some misinformation in our state conducted in a tour selling tickets, and you've seen this in some other states as well. What we did is we got hundreds of local officials, sheriffs, county clerks, county attorneys together with us and called them out on it. And I think it's pretty persuasive when you've got local officials, people that the constituents know, they go to church with them, they see them at the grocery. To get hundreds of those people together across party lines and call this stuff out, I think is one way that we've combated that problem.
So any suggestions for other secretaries of state looking to boost confidence in their elections in their states?
Well, certainly you need to both prioritize access and security. If you want the Democrats to think that you're up to something, then you focus only on security and you risk Democrats losing confidence in your system. Same thing on the other side with Republicans. You got to have access and security in everything that you do, and you have to comport yourself in a bipartisan fashion.
All right, Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, my pleasure.
And while the Republican primaries are testing Trump's influence over the GOP, the Democratic primaries are testing the power of the moderate and progressive wings of that party. 538 senior elections analyst Nathaniel Rakich joins me live now for more on that part of the equation. Nathaniel, in Kentucky, State Senate Minority Leader Morgan McGarvey is facing State Representative Attica Scott for the state's 3rd district. How is that shaping up so far?
Yeah, so McGarvey is kind of the establishment pick. He has the endorsement of the outgoing representative. He's still pretty liberal, though. On the other hand, Scott, who's challenging him from the left, she is definitely kind of more purely progressive. She supports defunding the police, for example. She would also be Kentucky's first Black member of Congress. So I'd have to give McGarvey the edge at this point, given that he has spent more money and stuff like that, but it is competitive.
Now, there are competitive races also in North Carolina where outside spending is playing a big role. How could that affect the makeup of the state's representatives?
Yeah, so the most expensive primary in North Carolina history is taking place today in the 4th district, which is an open, safely blue seat. So some groups that have been backed by AIPAC, a pro-Israel group, as well as a cryptocurrency billionaire, are spending heavily to elect State Senator Valerie Fourchet. She's more establishment in terms of her ideology. She's also facing two kind of slightly more progressive options. You have a local county commissioner, Nida Alam, and then you also have singer Clay Aiken of American Idol fame. So that's going to be a closely watched race. You also have some open races in the 1st district and the 13th district that have shown some similar dynamics.
Now, whoever wins the Democratic primary in Oregon will likely become the state's next governor. 15 candidates are battling it out there. Who do you have your eye on?
I think the two leading candidates there are former State House Speaker Tina Kotek, who would be the first openly lesbian governor of any state, and State Treasurer Tobias Reed. The other candidates aren't necessarily doing as well in terms of fundraising in the polls. I'd also point out, though, that there are some strong Republicans in the race, so I wouldn't be quite so fast to write off Republicans in the fall.
And there are 28 Republican primaries in 5 states underway. What are you watching for there?
Yeah, the big races there are obviously in Pennsylvania for the U.S. Senate and for governor. Trump has made a pick in both of those races. For Senate, he's endorsed Mehmet Oz, a celebrity physician. But a lot of people feel like Oz isn't conservative enough. He's taken liberal positions in the past on abortion, for example. And so author Kathy Barnett, who is much more of a kind of gung-ho Trump conservative, she's been surging in the polls. And then for governor, Trump's pick, Doug Mastriano, looks like he's the favorite. He actually led the charge to overturn the 2020 election in the state. And a lot of folks are worried that if he were governor, he wouldn't certify a Democratic win in Pennsylvania in 2024. So it'll be interesting to see if he has a chance in November if he does win the primary.
All right, Nathaniel Rakich from 538, thank you. And
Thanks.
For more information on the midterms and all things politics related, you can scan the QR code in the lower right corner of your screen. There you will find the latest on the 2022 primaries. Coming up, Congress held its first hearing on UFOs in more than 50 years. We'll have more on that when we come back. Welcome back to ABC News Live. The FDA has authorized COVID booster shots for kids 5 to 11 years old, clearing the way for the CDC's advisory panel to review the data on Thursday. If they vote in favor and the CDC director approves, we could see kids as young as 5 getting their booster as soon as this weekend. Right now, more than 25 million eligible children are still completely unvaccinated. Gas prices have hit a new record high. The national average is now $4.52 a gallon and more than $6 a gallon in California. Experts say gas prices could average $4.75 by the end of the month, with $5 a gallon becoming more common. Congress held its first public hearing on UFOs in more than 50 years today. Pentagon officials testified about how the Defense Department is organizing reports of what they call unidentified aerial phenomena. A congressionally mandated report released last year found that most of the analyzed incidents were still unidentified. And the maker of Skittles, Starburst, and Lifesavers gummies has issued a voluntary recall of the popular candies. Mars Wrigley Confectionery made the move due to the potential of a very thin metal strand embedded in specific varieties of the candies or loose in the bag. The company is working to remove them from store shelves and tells consumers to throw out any bags from specific lots being recalled. You can get that information on the FDA website. And thanks for watching. I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis after this.
News, America's #1 news source.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Coming up, President Biden is in Buffalo, New York, meeting with the families of the victims of the supermarket mass shooting as we learn more information about how the suspect allegedly planned the attack. Plus, why the California church shooting is now also being investigated as a hate crime, and new details on how worshipers took down the gunman. After weeks of resistance, Ukrainian fighters have withdrawn from the bombarded steel plant in Mariupol, Ukraine, what it means for Russia's battle plans. And voters in Pennsylvania are heading to the polls in key primaries, putting President Trump's endorsement of Dr. Oz to the test. We have complete coverage ahead. But we begin in Buffalo, New York, where President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden have arrived and are expected to meet with families of the victims in the mass shooting there. Meanwhile, ABC News has obtained a document allegedly posted by the suspect online. Authorities say it appears to show how he carefully planned the shooting. ABC senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky and ABC's Kenneth Moten joining me live now for more on this. Kenneth, we saw President Biden and the First Lady lay down flowers at the scene along with other New York leaders. What else can we expect from the president's visit today?
Well, Diane, right now, President Biden and the First Lady are meeting with the families of those 10 victims after those victims were gunned down over the weekend. Mostly black people who were targeted because of the color of their skin. He is, at this hour, we understand, wrapping his arms and giving words of condolences and support to those family members at a community center. The president also meeting with first responders, law enforcement. He and the First Lady, before that moment there at the community center, when they touched down in Buffalo, they went straight to the Tops Market, the scene of this horrific and heinous crime, and they laid down flowers and prayed there at that memorial, where we saw a growing memorial there of flowers and cards and just people sharing memories of those victims, those people who were, many of them, pillars of the community as well. The president is expected to speak around 1 o'clock, and the White House says the president will call this horrific crime what it is, a hate-filled attack that was motivated, again, not only by hate, but domestic extremism. We asked the White House press secretary, who told reporters on Air Force One, we asked her about how deep these remarks will go when it comes to replacement theory, something we've talked a lot about in the past couple of days. And she said that the White House is not going to give them a platform, those who really push replacement theory as well. She had no information on any possible intelligence that would show concerns about copycat attacks, and she said the White House is still studying details of a House Democrat domestic terrorism bill because, and the reason I bring that up, Diane, is because the president, as he meets with these families, yes, they want to be consoled, they want to hear from the president, but they're also demanding answers and action.
Now, Aaron, investigators say that the suspect in this case not only was at the supermarket the day before the shooting, but he also made a visit back in March. What do we know about those visits?
That revelation seems to have caught law enforcement officials here off guard. It does not appear that they knew until this was revealed in an online posting that the suspect, Peyton Gendron, had actually been here 2 months in advance of the massacre. And that does suggest a level of premeditation that may later factor into a prosecution. But right now, the investigators are trying to work backwards. They want to know exactly what he did, where he went, who he met with, what statements he might have made, as they try to figure out the extent of the planning into the shooting that unfolded here on Saturday. And it does seem like that planning was extensive. The online posts indicate a detailed hand-drawn map of the grocery store here behind me, down to the very aisles where the gunman could maneuver as he was opening fire.
Now, Kenneth, the president is also expected to call for more action on gun legislation. What do we know about what he'll say there?
Well, we know the president will call on Congress to act, but we know that advocates believe that it's the president who should take some executive action if Congress won't act when it comes to gun reform legislation. We spoke a lot yesterday about the fact that Congress has not and will likely not have any type of significant gun reform legislation, but the president, according to the White House, is expected to forcefully call on Congress to do something, and common sense gun reform legislation when it comes to expanding background checks, when it comes to making sure that you keep guns and weapons of war off the street, but you also keep guns out of the hands of criminals and those who are suffering from mental illness, who could just potentially hurt themselves or others, as we've seen in these mass shootings. The president, we will be monitoring those remarks from the president later today, but again, they're expected to come around 1 o'clock, Diane.
Now, Aaron, overnight the suspect's friend spoke to ABC News saying that the suspect dropped ammunition off at his house the day before the shooting, said he would pick it up later that evening, but never did. Could that help the investigation?
Well, it's certainly an interesting piece of evidence. The friend told us that investigators came to claim the ammunition that he said Peyton Gendron dropped off at his house before the shooting, and they'll certainly take a look at it. I think the friend also gave us a little bit of some character insight as well, to say that he didn't think he was a violent guy, but did like to talk about guns and ammunition and body armor. In fact, seems to have purchased a ballistic piece of metal that he at one point hung on his wall.
All right, Aaron Katersky, Kenneth Moten, thank you both. And the FBI now says Sunday's mass shooting at a Taiwanese church function in Laguna Woods, California, is also being investigated as a hate crime. Investigators say there's evidence the 68-year-old alleged shooter, who was raised in Taiwan, was motivated by hatred for Taiwanese people. But the congregants fought back and held the gunman until cops arrived. ABC Chief National Correspondent Matt Gutman has more.
Those exclusive images, parishioners pinning to the ground the shooting suspect who opened fire on their congregation. Beside them, that knife. And to the right, that blurred image, the fallen Dr. John Cheng, one of several heroes of Sunday's church service shooting. Police say 68-year-old David Cho, seen in this mugshot, killed Cheng and wounded 5 others. Victims ranging in age from 66 to 92.
A politically motivated hate incident, agreements that this individual had between himself and the Taiwanese community at large.
The gunman, a naturalized American citizen born in China, was a licensed security guard from Las Vegas, allegedly leaving behind writings the FBI is investigating as evidence of a hate crime. The day had started with a celebration. About 50 people at the Taiwanese Presbyterian congregation welcoming back Pastor Billy Chang from Taiwan. What they could never have known was that the suspect, who the church says was wearing a black security T-shirt, had allegedly set a trap.
The suspect was able to secure the doors within the church with chains and tried to disable locks within the church with super glue.
Some parishioners managed to escape through the one door the shooter did not lock. And at the moment he stopped to reload, Pastor Billy sprang into action, grabbing a chair and slamming it into the shooter.
I pushed him under the floor.
So you hit him and then pushed him down onto the floor and his gun dropped. How quickly did people come to help you when you managed to get him down on the ground?
Pretty soon.
Pretty soon.
Yeah, some people around helped me to push him in the floor.
They may have been elderly, but they were unafraid. Dr. Cheng leading the charge.
The majority of the people in attendance were elderly, and they acted spontaneously, heroically. There would have been many, many more lives lost if not for the concerted effort of the members of that church.
Pastor Billy struggling with the loss.
Pray for the Mrs. Chen family and our congregation.
Diane, the church putting out a statement overnight saying that gunman lurked around the church for several hours before the shooting, strategically placing Molotov cocktails, ammunition. That's when he chained and nailed some of the doors shut. Parishioners thought that he was working security there because of a T-shirt he was wearing. That was until they opened fire. Now that suspect is going to be arraigned today here in Orange County, facing 1 charge of murder, 5 charges of attempted murder, and of course, there are that FBI hate crimes investigation as well. Diane.
All right, Matt Gutman in Laguna Woods, California. Thank you. Finland and Sweden are pushing ahead with their efforts to join NATO as tensions rise over the war in Ukraine. Finland's parliament today overwhelmingly voted to approve seeking membership in the alliance, and Sweden's foreign minister has now signed a formal application letter. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have ended their defense of the besieged city of Mariupol. Many of the last fighters have now been evacuated from the steel plant stronghold there. Senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell has the latest from Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Ukraine appearing to end its combat mission in Mariupol, scene of the heaviest fighting in this conflict, striking a deal with Russia to evacuate over 260 Ukrainian soldiers from the Azovstal steel plant. The soldiers were living, fighting and dying there under a relentless siege for nearly 3 months. 53 other badly injured Ukrainian fighters were transported to the Russian-backed rebel city of Novoazovsk for medical treatment. Another 211 soldiers were to be exchanged for Russian prisoners of war. President Zelensky paying tribute, saying, "I want to stress, Ukraine needs Ukrainian heroes alive." Here in the northeast, Ukraine claiming victories outside of Kharkiv, pushing the Russians back towards the border. This comes as NATO's conducting long-planned military drills across Europe, including Estonia, with 15,000 troops from NATO members and partner countries expected to participate, including Finland and Sweden, both now intending to become full members of the alliance. Sweden's foreign minister formally signing her country's application this morning, as the Finnish parliament voted resoundingly in favour of membership. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin meeting with Russia's top allies, condemning Sweden and Finland's plans to join NATO, saying the expansion of military infrastructure over that territory will obviously call for our response. In a move likely to anger Russia, Biden inviting the leaders of Finland and Sweden to the White House Thursday for a visit.
Diane, we're on the scene of one of the many bomb blasts in Kharkiv city. As you can see, the work to try and clear the debris is well and truly underway. You really get a sense of the scale of the destruction inside this courtyard. There isn't a building around here that hasn't been blasted and heavily damaged, if not totally destroyed. And there are thousands of sites like this. But even though the war is grinding on, the Ukrainians are trying to clear up the sites, make them safe, at least clear away the debris and bring normal life back to the city. The Ukrainians, of course, now claiming military success in pushing the Russians back towards their own border, but, of course, having to concede defeat effectively in the city of Mariupol. Diane?
All right, Ian, panel, thank you. And the FDA and Abbott Laboratories, the nation's biggest supplier of baby formula, have agreed on a plan to reopen Abbott's plant in Michigan to help ease the formula shortage here in the U.S. The FDA says it is also taking steps to make it easier to import formula not sold in the country. Ariel Reshef has the latest.
The FDA taking steps to ease the burden for families facing the dire nationwide formula shortage, but cautioning a resolution is still weeks away. The agency announcing it is moving to import brands of formula from abroad, currently not sold in the U.S.
We are seeking manufacturers from around the globe who may have available product that could meet our regulatory standards for both nutrition and food safety.
The U.S. normally produces 98% of the infant formula it consumes. Officials say those cans from overseas must undergo safety testing and will need labels with English instructions before they can be distributed. The FDA also laying out a plan with Abbott Nutrition, the largest domestic formula manufacturer, to reopen its critical plant in Michigan. The facility shut down since February after a voluntary recall and inspection by the FDA over safety concerns, dramatically stalling formula supply. Abbott saying it will take 2 weeks to restart operations and up to 2 more months to get its products onto shelves.
The biggest fear that I have is how long is this going to last?
For now, moms like Barbie Van from Oklahoma doing all she can to get her 3-month-old daughter Addison what she needs.
I am trying to exhaust every resource that I can, reaching out to friends and family in other states, asking them to please look at their local stores.
And the FDA not specifying which brands it will seek to import from overseas, only saying we are casting a broad net. The agency assuring any products that make it to store shelves here in the U.S. will have gone through rigorous safety checks. Diane?
All right, Ariel Reshef, thank you. Coming up, our ABC News Live coverage of key primary elections taking place across the U.S. today. The battles playing out between moderate and progressive Democrats when we come back. Welcome back. Voters are headed to the polls today in 5 states where primaries could set the stage for contentious midterm elections. It's a key test for former President Trump's influence over the Republican Party, and several candidates have embraced Trump's false claims about the 2020 election. Kentucky's Republican Secretary of State Michael Adams joins me live now for more on this. Secretary Adams, thanks for being here. How is your office working to make sure that the people of Kentucky have confidence in these elections?
Well, I'd say we've done two things. Number one, we've been very fair, very objective in our duties. We've improved public perception in this office by rooting out scandals that were here before I got here. And we've been very bipartisan. I've worked across party lines with our Democratic governor, Democrats around the state, so they have confidence in the Republican who's over their elections. We've also made tangible improvements. We've transitioned to paper ballots, which voters of both sides have confidence in. We've improved the security of our process. We've cleaned up the voter rolls, but we've also expanded access. I think one thing that the two parties get wrong is they either care about access or security. It's a both and thing. You can have both.
Now, to your point, during the pandemic, you and Democratic Governor Andy Beshear were heralded for your bipartisan collaboration. How has that bipartisanship continued into these primaries?
Well, we have bipartisanship baked into our system in Kentucky. We've got a bipartisan state board of elections. Every county has a bipartisan board of elections, and every single voting location by law in Kentucky has a mix of D's and R's working the polls. And so that's something that I'm real proud of. You don't see the sort of controversy in Kentucky that you see in some other states where people think the rules are rigged for one side or the other. We do this in a bipartisan fashion.
So what kind of safeguards are in place if one of the candidates does call the results into question and refuses to concede?
Well, we actually have had some misinformation in our state conducted in a tour selling tickets, and you've seen this in some other states as well. What we did is we got hundreds of local officials, sheriffs, county clerks, county attorneys together with us and called them out on it. And I think it's pretty persuasive when you've got local officials, people that the constituents know, they go to church with them, they see them at the grocery. To get hundreds of those people together across party lines and call this stuff out, I think is one way that we've combated that problem.
So any suggestions for other secretaries of state looking to boost confidence in their elections in their states?
Well, certainly you need to both prioritize access and security. If you want the Democrats to think that you're up to something, then you focus only on security and you risk Democrats losing confidence in your system. Same thing on the other side with Republicans. You got to have access and security in everything that you do, and you have to comport yourself in a bipartisan fashion.
All right, Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, my pleasure.
And while the Republicans... President Biden, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, Buffalo's mayor, and other speakers are delivering remarks following what investigators say was a racially motivated mass shooting at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York. The president has been in Buffalo meeting with victims and families, as well as first responders. Let's listen.
Imagine what it's the searing pain that just must be going through your bodies to think that your loved one is no longer with us. We're still trying to comprehend this. But there's also this other side of our broken heart that is filled with some anger, and it's because we're human beings. You can't witness what happened to this community, where an individual who is radicalized in the beliefs of white supremacy and nationalism, who was so taken with these philosophies that are now becoming way too mainstream. They're not just in the dark web anymore. They're starting to percolate up. We're actually elected officials are starting to embrace them and talk about them. And you hear about them in Congress by certain people, and you hear about them on cable shows. It's not just buried in the web anywhere. So these hateful philosophies are starting to become mainstream, and they took hold in the mind of an 18-year-old who lives 3 hours from here. And he targeted this community, intentionally coming to this zip code because he could do maximum damage and death to people, not just any New Yorker, but he was targeting and wanted to execute Black New Yorkers. That's hard to comprehend, the depth of that hate. And it wasn't that alone, though. You can have that hate in your heart, and you can sit in your house and ferment these evil thoughts, but you can't act on it unless you have a weapon. And that's the intersection of these two crises in our nation right now. The mainstreaming of the hate speech and the racism and everything else that brought that person to this point, but also the access to military-style weapons and magazines, and it is that lethal combination that resulted in the loss of 10 decent, good people. We pray for them, but they're not with us because of that combination. So this is not just a call to action for the people of Buffalo, and they are rising up. You cannot believe the depth of their spirit and their resiliency. I've embraced them, I've hugged them, I've cried with them. We will get through this because this is Buffalo. We're tough. But this should not just provoke a conversation in this community. This needs to stimulate a national conversation about how we make sure that we're doing everything we humanly can to eradicate this evil and send it back under the rock from which it came. That is what we must do in our nation, and continue to work on the access to guns. Yes, the gun he acquired was illegal in the state of New York, but it still had the capacity to kill people. But you couple that with an illegal magazine from another state you brought in literally minutes away in Pennsylvania. You know how easy that is? That's why we need a national gun policy that's common sense like we have here in New York. We need this everywhere. But my friends, we are here to say, yes, we'll have those conversations, but there'll be more than conversation. We're not just going to talk about it until the next crisis and the eyes of the world turn away from Buffalo. We're going to keep them focused on what happened here to 10 human beings, our neighbors. And we'll never lose sight of that. That's who we're fighting for. That's who we're heading into this fight with. Those people in our hearts and our minds. So, as we've prayed since Saturday, a lot of us have been in a lot of churches and services. We pray that God will give healing to these families and this community. But God, give us the strength to forge ahead with the strength and conviction that justice must be done, but also changes must be made. And we'll all remember that it started here in Buffalo, New York. And with that, I'm going to bring up another son of Buffalo, someone who loves this community so deeply, and that is our local Congressman, Brian Higgins.
Thank you, Governor Kathy Hochul. I know that many people have been recognized, but I too want to recognize the mayor of Buffalo, Byron Brown. He does his best work under the most difficult of circumstances. A lot of things have to occur over the next several weeks, but I don't want to get in front of it because we want to remember the victims. They were mothers and grandmothers. They were fathers and grandfathers. They were young adults. They were people of faith, a retired teacher and a retired police officer. 10 individuals who woke up on Saturday morning, left their homes, saying goodbye to their loved ones, having every expectation that they would return safely. And their lives were taken from them because of a blatant, vile, racist act of domestic terrorism. We need laws. We need a federal statute that criminalizes domestic terror of this nature. We need to get assault weapons off the street so our police officers can be safe and continue to keep us safe on our streets and in every situation that we find ourselves in. And finally, I just want to say about the community of Buffalo. Buffalo is a tough place. It's resilient. It has overcome adversity in many circumstances. We have never had such terror exacted on this community in the entire history of this community. But what we can do from all of this is learn. They say that to live is to suffer. To overcome the suffering is to give meaning to the suffering. The Greeks say that we suffer our way to wisdom. It is a hard fought for wisdom, but the hope is, in the days immediately in front of us, working at the state, federal, and local level, we will find a way to stop the violence and the hate in this community and in this country and throughout the world. With that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the junior senator from New York State, a great friend and former colleague in the House, Kirsten Gillibrand.
Today is a day of deep mourning. It's a day of deep sadness. It's a day of reflection. There's a great deal of anger. There's a need for justice. There's a need to right wrongs. And all of us are here today because we want to support this community in Buffalo that is resilient, that is tough, that knows hard times but knows how to build back and knows how to overcome. The people who were slaughtered by this evil were very good people, among the best. Aaron Salter was a father and a retired police officer who gave his life to save others. Celestine Chaney was a single mom, a grandmom, breast cancer survivor. Hayward Patterson was a deacon in the local church. Ruth Whitfield was a mother and grandmother who sang in the choir and had just visited her husband. Roberta Drury was a young woman who was visiting her brother who was recovering from leukemia. Catherine Massey, she was a civil rights activist, and Pearl Young was a missionary and a teacher. She touched the apple of God's eye, according to her niece. So these people, these and three others and others who were injured, they're the best of our community. And when bad things happen to good people, we all begin to say, this doesn't make sense. We as legislators, we will gather and say we are going to end gun violence, we are going to ban assault rifles and large magazines, we are going to fix our criminal justice system so that there's justice, we are going to make our community safer. But those are just promises and hopes and goals and things we strive for. But for a community of faith, and many of the people who lost their lives and their families come from that community, we were never promised that life would be easy. In fact, we were always promised that there will be troubles. And we are promised that all tears will be wiped away, that at the end, death will be destroyed, and every tear will be wiped away. We have so much work to be done as a community to heal, as elected leaders to get justice for these families, and to make this a stronger, better community. But I can promise you every single one of us are dedicated to doing that until it's done. God bless you all. I now would like to introduce Senator Schumer, who is not only our great senator in this state, but is the majority leader of the United States. And as a result, he has had an extraordinary voice for New York, an outsized voice that gets everything done. Senator Schumer.
Good afternoon. And first, I want to thank all of you for being here. And I want to thank you, President Biden and Dr. Biden, for coming to Buffalo. Amidst all the hurt and pain, Mr. President, when you said you would come, your announcement was a strong ray of hope to this community. Now, like all of you, today what I feel above all is just immense anguish. Nothing I can say will undo the terrible suffering you are enduring, nor bring back those, beautiful young lady there, those who were senselessly and unjustly taken from us. But I can say this: Buffalonians are brave, compassionate, resolute, and this community will emerge from this tragedy stronger and more determined than before. I know that because I know this community. I remember like it was yesterday when I stood outside the new Top supermarket on Jefferson Avenue. I was proud to have advocated for its construction, bringing affordable and healthy food to this food desert. What we didn't know then was just how much the Tops would become a neighborhood gathering place, which is why this vicious killer chose this supermarket for his evil deed. He wanted to put a dagger in the heart of the community, how vicious and mean and cruel and deranged he was. I'm sure many of you shop there. It's where you buy your groceries on your way home from church before the Bills game. It's where you see your friends and relatives and catch up between errands. Buffalo is the city of good neighbors, and nowhere is this more true than on the East Side. And to the city of good neighbors, I pledge to stand with you through this awful, awful tragedy, to work in the Senate to oppose the poison of white supremacy that inspired this attack, to work towards finally ridding our streets of weapons of war, and to make sure that this community has all the resources necessary to heal, to endure, to stand tall once again. May God bless those who lost their lives, the loved ones they leave behind, and may He protect the injured and keep them safe from harm. As the scripture in Isaiah says, "Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted."
Progress, but
Looking there at Buffalo, New York, the scene of a mass shooting over the weekend at a supermarket. We've already heard from Governor Kathy Hochul of New York saying that this shooting came about as a result of access to guns, and a combination with that, and in her words, the suspect was radicalized in the beliefs of white supremacy. Investigators have said this is being investigated as a hate crime. They believe it was racially motivated. All 10 of the victims killed were black. We also heard from Senator Chuck Schumer. You can see him there in the front row, talking about the anguish that he and obviously members of the community are feeling right now. These lawmakers are now vowing to take action. We also heard from Senator Gillibrand on the same front. We're, of course, waiting to hear from President Biden, who we saw earlier today arriving in Buffalo. He and the First Lady have already laid down flowers at the scene of the attack. They met with family members of the victims and believed to maybe still be meeting with some of those family members of the victims and trying to work out how to now address this. We are expecting to hear from the mayor of Buffalo, New York, and again, as well as the president. Now, President Biden has long advocated for more gun legislation. We're expecting him to call on Congress to do more. What we know so far, what investigators are saying, is that the shooter in this case did have a gun on him and a magazine that was illegal to purchase in New York, but that he purchased that magazine just over the state border in Pennsylvania. So this is leading to leaders like the president and others to call for more federal legislation on gun legislation to try to prevent events like this from happening again. And again, just waiting to hear from President Biden here. We're going to go to Kenneth Moten, who's in Washington, D.C. for us following this. Kenneth, what else are we expecting to hear from the president today, and what else is planned for this trip?
Well, this is a time for the president to not only address this predominantly black community where this racist attack happened over the weekend, but it's also a chance for the president to speak to a nation, to say that it's time, and it's way past time, to truly accept the diversity that makes up this country and to fully reject white supremacy. We know this country has been dealing with the scourge of white supremacy for centuries. And here in 2022, we had an 18-year-old white man traveled 200 miles to Buffalo, New York, to this predominantly black community, and to open fire at the one supermarket that this area, which is known to have a food desert, this place is gathering place to get food and other community members meet, and he opened fire on these people. I was just reading the words of the son of one of the victims, an 86-year-old victim. And as we hear this parade of lawmakers, legislators, top officials here in this country, leaders of this country, say what they're going to do with pushing for legislation that we have not seen any action here in Washington. But as the people in that community and the victims' families listen to those leaders come to their city and try to console them, I am struck by the words of Garnell Whitfield, the son of 86-year-old Ruth Whitfield, who said, "We're not just hurting, we're angry, we're mad. This shouldn't have happened. We do our best to be good citizens, to be good people. We believe in God, we trust him, we treat people with decency, and we even love our enemies. And you expect us to keep doing this over and over again. Forgive and forget," he said, while the people we elect and trust in offices around the country do their best to not protect us, not to consider us equal, not to love us back. What are we supposed to do with all this anger and all this pain? We can imagine, Diane, that some of those words were said to the President of the United States over the past couple of hours as he met with those grieving families.
Yeah, Kenneth, and just to recap for anyone just joining us, 10 people died in that shooting. 3 were hurt on Saturday at that supermarket in Buffalo, New York. Police say that gunman had shown up with a racist agenda, appeared to be targeting black people at the store, employees and just shoppers. Authorities say they're now looking through some social media posts allegedly posted by the suspect that suggest he was a proponent of replacement theory. That's a white supremacist notion that claims white people are actively being replaced with minorities for the purpose of political gain. They're also looking at a document that authorities say appears to show how carefully he planned this attack, including drawings of the supermarket. They believe he was there not only the day before the attack, but also back in March. So investigators are now painting the picture of an attack that was not only premeditated, but also appears to have been carefully planned here. And Kenneth, you know, I talked a little bit about not only the president's take on the mindset that it seems like police are now putting together for this alleged gunman, but also this access to weapons that we heard the governor of New York saying what was also part of this issue. What specifically do you expect to hear from the president in terms of calls for more gun legislation?
The president will call for Congress to help take weapons of war off the street. You know, this AR-15 style rifle that the suspected gunman used over the weekend there in Buffalo. And if we go back to many of the mass killings here in this country, we can trace them back to those weapons of war. And when we say weapons of war, we mean exactly that. What you would typically see the military carrying in Afghanistan, overseas, places where they were fighting terror. But here we are on the streets of America where these guns are being used against its citizens. As you see, we believe those are family members who were sitting down after they just met, nearly 2 hours with the president, who also met with community leaders and law enforcement. Those family members had a chance to speak with the president directly and the First Lady, but now they want to hear action. They want to see action. So you mentioned the weapons of war. Also, there is a national strategy to counter domestic terrorism that the White House and this president put out as soon as he took office. We understand that the White House says the Department of Justice is still reviewing that strategy and what needs to be done, if there need to be legislative action or authorities that's given to authorities across this country federally to go after domestic extremism and terrorism as well. You heard one city official just now on the mic saying, calling for a federal statute that criminalizes domestic terrorism of this nature. This is something that we've seen this back and forth in this country about what needs to be done to not only stop and prevent this type of terrorism, but how to punish it as well. Unfortunately, for the 10 victims there in Buffalo, it's too little, too late for them. And those family members, again, as I just read what Mr. Whitfield, that anger that he expressed there, they want to see more from this Congress and from this president.
And Kenneth, we know that the president was also meeting with family members of the victims of this shooting. Do we know what is coming of those conversations? What's expected to happen there?
We don't know what was said. We know that the White House said that the president wanted to be there to offer support and condolences. We expect to hear a little bit more. The family members have been very vocal since this tragedy because they want people to know the names of their loved ones, and they want people to know that more needs to be done to prevent this from happening again. And so we expect to hear a little bit more later on about those conversations with the president. But we can, you know, from knowing how this has all played out in the past and knowing how this tragedy can impact, you know, a family member, a loved one, a community, we know that those conversations were raw. We know that the people used that time and that opportunity to not only hear from the president, but to say what they needed to say to the president as well. And Diane, when you think about it, you know, I was just commenting that, you know, this federal statute that criminalizes domestic terrorism of this nature, about the debate that's been going on about this is a debate that happens every single time. And it did not help the people and the children of Sandy Hook. It did not help the victims of Las Vegas, of Charleston and the Emanuel 9. It did not help the Parkland victims, Pittsburgh. The list goes on and on and on. And so many people in this country know that when something like this happens, they ask the question, is my community next?
And Kenneth, so far on the federal level, we heard just now from Senators Gillibrand and Senator Chuck Schumer, both Democrats. How are lawmakers across the aisle reacting to this event? And is there any plan to have some type of gun reform in front of Congress in the near future, as they're proposing?
Yeah, not only do you have the Democrats there from the state of New York, where this tragedy happened, but you have the Senate Majority Leader, the top Democrat and top leader there in the Senate, represents the state of New York. And he's saying that, you know, I promise I'm going to go back to D.C. And take action. But here's the reality here, Diane, is that Congress has not taken any significant steps to have true and meaningful gun reform legislation, and it doesn't look like they're going to. You asked me about what are the Republicans saying, the people on the other side, because Democrats are calling for more reforms here. We're not hearing much. We know that when these things happen, we hear about the condolences, the thoughts, and the prayers, but each time, even under former President Trump, when there were the red flag laws that were enacted in many states, including Florida, which had a Republican governor, after the Parkland shooting, we saw those red flag laws where it took weapons away from those who were deemed criminals or deemed dangerous and potentially could hurt themselves or others. We saw red flag laws popping up in several states, but then it started to die down. It started to, there was a lot of criticism and pushback from rank and file Republicans and gun rights advocates who thought that these red flag laws were going too far, that they were violating people's Second Amendment rights. And then we started to see it stall. And that's, again, I talk about the pattern here, is that there is the act of the mass shooting, the crime, the horrific fallout as well, and then there's a call for gun reform. There might be a little bit of action, but nothing major, and then it stalls, and then there's nothing that's done, and then we have essentially a rinse and repeat that happens. But you have those top legislators there who work here in D.C., those Senators Schumer and Senator Gillibrand, who are promising to do something and take action, but likely, and not to be a cynic here, likely we won't see anything happen.
Now, Kenneth, the president had said that he was moved to run for office in the first place, for president, that is, after seeing images from Charlottesville, seeing white supremacists marching on Charlottesville, and he vowed to fight racism with this administration. Do you think he's going to directly call that out today? And what action do you think he's going to propose on that front?
Yeah, we do expect, according to sources, that the president will take a very forceful line when it comes to white supremacy, domestic extremism. Again, as soon as he took office, he put out that national strategy to counter domestic terrorism. And one of the reasons the president has to do this is, to put it in very simple terms, the president owes the black community. The black community, specifically the black community in the state of South Carolina, during that February primary, when he was running for election, the reason that Joe Biden is standing where he is today, according to many in the black community and the way they see it. And so for the president to stand there, they want to hear more than words. They want to hear words that they believe will lead to action and that could potentially lead to action here. And so we believe the president will be pretty forceful about calling out what led to this very hate-filled attack.
And Kenneth, in terms of other legislation, we know we've also heard that the suspect in this case had been evaluated for mental health issues previously. There were concerns that he may have been planning to, or he actually threatened to potentially shoot, create a shooting like this at a local high school graduation. So he was evaluated by law enforcement, he was evaluated by mental health professionals, and no charges were ever filed. Do you expect that to come up today?
That is something we've heard from these leaders. Even some that took the podium just now have said repeatedly that, number one, they don't want to stigmatize mental health. The White House press secretary said that yesterday as well at the podium, that when we talk about mental health, we don't want to stigmatize, because there are people who are suffering and dealing with mental health issues, but yet they don't go and really go and open fire on a crowd of people at a supermarket. And so when it comes to mental health, that's a potential that could be discussed. And we have heard the White House say that when it comes to taking guns off the street and keeping them out of the hands of criminals, they say they want to keep them out of the hands of anyone who is dealing with mental health issues as well. But it's an issue that goes along with the conversation that needs to be had, and definitely mental health is something in this country that needs to be looked at.
And I want to go over to Aaron Katursky, our senior investigative reporter, who's there at the scene of this shooting. Oh, actually, it looks like we're going to hear from the mayor of Buffalo. Let's listen.
Raise the jar to all five.
The Delavan Grider Community Center on the east side of Buffalo. I want to thank Candace Moppins, the executive director, and the members of the board of directors for hosting us today. Beloved community, as mayor of the city of Buffalo, on behalf of the more than 278,000 residents of our city, I want to just extend our deepest and most heartfelt condolences to the family members of the victims of the vicious attack on our community. I want the family members to know that we love you, that we care about you, and collectively we are here to wrap our arms around you and to help lift you up during this very difficult time. This is a time of great pain and sorrow for all of us in the city of Buffalo. But we are trusting and leaning on God to get us through this dark and difficult time. We are very thankful that in the midst of this darkness, we have a president and first lady who care deeply about our community and communities all across the country. President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden are people with extraordinary compassion and empathy. They wanted to be here for this community. They wanted to help us with our process of healing. And we are so thankful.
This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon, and we're coming on the air because President Biden is about to speak in Buffalo addressing the horrific mass shooting at the Tops Market where 10 people were killed, 3 wounded. All of those killed were black. The 18-year-old suspect, allegedly armed with an AR-15, accused of carefully plotting what authorities call a racially motivated attack. The president now approaching on the stage at a community center in East Buffalo. He's there with the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. Let's listen to the president as he addresses the people of Buffalo.
Before I begin, Jill would like to say a few words.
I just wanted to say thank you to the families for opening up your hearts to us and for letting us be with you today. So God bless you, and thank you for allowing us to be with you. Yeah.
Majority Leader Schumer and Senator Gillibrand and Congressman Higgins. And Gov, thank you for taking my call when I called. And I'll never forget what she said. I said, I'd like to maybe come up if it's okay. She said, this is a big Scranton. Come. And I think you're doing a heck of a job. Thank you. Thank you for your heart as well as your head. And Mayor Brown, you've been wonderful. Thank you, and I know this is a lot of, when a vice presidential or a presidential chip shows up, it's there's all kinds of paraphernalia and people, and I know it's not easy. I want to thank your law enforcement officers for not just what they did in this crisis, but for accommodating us, and all the elected officials and law enforcement officers, first responders, and faith leaders that are here today. Jill and I have come to stand with you. And to the families, we've come to grieve with you. It's not the same, but we know a little bit what it's like to lose a piece of your soul. When you lose a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a mother, a father. The feeling of having that, as I said to some of you when we talked privately, you feel like there's a black hole in your chest you're being sucked into, and you're suffocating, unable to breathe. That's what it felt like, at least to us. And I'm sure some version of that feels that way to you. The anger, the pain, the depth of a loss that's so profound. You know, we know it's hard to believe, and you're probably not going to believe it, but I can tell you now, from our personal experience and many others who we've met, the day's going to come, it will come, when your loved one brings a smile as you remember him or her. As you remember her, it's going to bring a smile to your lip before it brings a tear to your eye. It takes a while for that to happen. It takes a while. It might take more than a season. But our prayer for you is that that time comes sooner or later, but I promise you it will come. As a nation, I say to the families, we remember them. We've been reading about them. We visited the memorial where they show the love for them, and you've all shown by the supermarket. And Celestine Cheney, 65 years old, brain cancer survivor, churchgoer, bingo player, went to buy strawberries to make her favorite shortcake. A loving mother and a grandmother. Roberta Drury, 32, beloved daughter and sister, moved back home to help take care of her brother after his bone marrow transplant. She went to buy groceries for dinner, the center of attention who made everyone in the room laugh and smile when she walked in. Andre McNeil, 53, worked at a restaurant, went to buy his 3-year-old son a birthday cake. His son's selling a birthday, asking where's daddy. Catherine Massey, 72, a writer and an advocate, who dressed up in costumes at schools and cut the grass in the park and helped in local elections, the glue of the family and the community. Marcus Morrison, 52, school bus aide, went to buy snacks for a weekly movie night with the family, survived by his wife and 3 children and a stepdaughter, the center of their world. Hayward Patterson, 67, father, church deacon, fed the homeless at the soup kitchen, gave rides at the grocery store to neighbors who needed help, putting food in the trunk of others when he took his final breath. Aaron Solder, 55, retired Buffalo police officer for 3 decades. 3 decades. Loved electric cars, hero who gave his life to save others on a Saturday afternoon. And had that man not been wearing that vest that he purchased, bulletproof vest, a lot of lives would have been saved. A beloved father and husband. Geraldine Talley, 62, expert banker and known for her warm, gentle personality, a friend to everybody, devoted mother and grandmother. Ruth Whitfield, 88, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, sang in the church choir, a caretaker of her husband, bringing him clean clothes, cutting his hair, holding his hand every day she visited him in the nursing home. Heart as big as her head. Pearl Young, 77, a mother, grandmother, missionary of God, public school teacher, who also ran a local food pantry. Loved singing, dancing, and her family. And all 3 are injured. Zaire Goodman, 20, shot in the neck, but fighting through it. Jennifer Warrington, 50, Christopher Braden, 55, both treated with injuries on a long road to recovery. Individual lives of love, service, and community. It speaks to the bigger story of who we are as Americans. A great nation, because we're good people. Jill and I bring you this message from deep in our nation's soul. In America, evil will not win, I promise you. Hate will not prevail, and white supremacy will not have the last word. For the evil did come to Buffalo. It's come to all too many places. Manifesting gunmen who massacred innocent people in the name of hateful and perverse ideology, rooted in fear and racism. It's taken so much. 10 lives cut short in a grocery store. 3 other wounded by a hate-filled individual who had driven 200 miles from Binghamton in that range to carry out a murderous, racist rampage that he would live stream to the world. What happened here is simple and straightforward. Terrorism. Terrorism. Domestic terrorism. Violence inflicted in the service of hate and the vicious thirst for power that defines one group of people being inherently inferior to any other group. A hate that through the media and politics, the internet, has radicalized, angry, alienated, lost, and isolated individuals into falsely believing that they will be replaced, that's the word, replaced, by the other, by people who don't look like them, and who are therefore in a perverse ideology that they possess and being fed lesser beings. I and all of you reject the lie. I call on all Americans to reject the lie. And I condemn those who spread the lie for power, political gain, and for profit. That's what it is. We've now seen too many times the deadly and destructive violence this ideology unleashes. We heard the chants, "You will not replace us," in Charlottesville, Virginia. I wasn't going to run, as the senator knows, again for president. But when I saw those people coming out of the woods, of the fields in Virginia, in Charlottesville, carrying torches, shouting, "You will not replace us," accompanied by white supremacists and carrying Nazi banners, that's when I said, no. No. And I, honest to God, those who know me, Chuck, you know, I wasn't going to run for certain. But I was going to be darned if I was going to let anyway. I'm going to get going. Look, we've seen the mass shootings in Charleston, South Carolina, El Paso, Texas, and Pittsburgh, last year in Atlanta, this week in Dallas, Texas, and now in Buffalo, New York. White supremacy is a poison. It's a poison running through, it really is. Running through our body politic. And it's been allowed to fester and grow right in front of our eyes. No more. I mean, no more. We need to say as clearly and forcefully as we can that the ideology of white supremacy has no place in America. None. And look, failure for us to not say that, failure in saying that, is going to be complicity. Silence is complicity. It's complicity. We cannot remain silent. Our nation's strength has always come from the idea. It's going to sound corny, but think about it. What's the idea of our nation? That we're all children of God. All life, liberty, our universal goods, gifts of God. We didn't get it from a government. We got it from because we exist. We're called upon to defend them. The venom of the haters and their weapons of war, the violence and the words and deeds that stalk our streets, our stores, our schools. This venom, this violence cannot be the story of our time. We cannot allow that to happen. Look, I'm not naive. I know tragedy will come again. It cannot be forever overcome. It cannot be fully understood either. But there are certain things we can do. We can keep assault weapons off our streets. We've done it before. I did it when we passed the crime bill last time, and violence went down, shootings went down. You can't prevent people from being radicalized to violence, but we can address the relentless exploitation of the internet to recruit and mobilize terrorism. We just need to have the courage to do that, to stand up. Look, the American experiment in democracy is in a danger like it hasn't been in my lifetime. It's in danger this hour. Hate and fear are being given too much oxygen by those who pretend to love America, but who don't understand America. To confront the ideology of hate requires caring about all people, not making distinctions. Reverend, the scripture is seeing that we're all part of the divine. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the America I know, that Jill knows. And most deserve the most, look, we're the most multiracial, most dynamic nation in the history of the world. Now's the time. for the people of all races, from every background, to speak up as a majority in America and reject white supremacy. These actions we've seen in these hate-filled attacks represent the views of a hate-filled minority. We can't allow them to distort America, the real America. We can't allow them to destroy the soul of the nation. As President of the United States, I travel the world all the time. And other nations ask me, heads of state in other countries, ask me, what's going on? What in God's name happened on January 6th? What happened in Buffalo? What happened? They'll ask. We have to refuse to live in a country where black people going about a weekly grocery shopping can be gunned down by weapons of war deployed in a racist cause. We have to refuse to live in a country where fear and lies are packaged for power and for profit. We must all enlist in this great cause of America. This is work that requires all of us, presidents, politicians, commentators, citizens. None of us can stay in the sidelines. We have to resolve that here in Buffalo, that from the tragedy, this tragedy will come hope and light and life. It has to. And that on our watch, the sacred cause of America will never bow, never break, never bend. And the American we love, the one we love, will endure. So to the families, from your pain, may we find purpose to live life worthy of the loved ones you lost. From a hymn based on the 91st Psalm that's sung in my church, may he raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. That's my wish for us. We can do this if we resolve to do it. If we take on the haters and those who don't even care, it's just about profit and politics. May the soul of the fallen rest in peace and rise in glory. And may God guide the United States of America, now and always. To the families, as my grandpop used to say when I walked out of his home in Scranton, he'd say, Joey, spread the faith. And my grandma would yell, no, Joey. He'd say, keep the faith. And my grandma would say, no, Joey, spread the faith. We're thinking of you. Hold on to each other tightly. Stick together. You'll get through this. And we'll make Buffalo and the United States a better place to live than it is today.
President Biden hugging the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, as they speak to the people of Buffalo. This afternoon, the president saying hate and fear is being given too much oxygen in this country. He said those who use it for power, political gain, and profit, he called them out. He said we must reject the lie. He said white supremacy is poison. A poison in this country, no more. Let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, listening in on this, Mary. And these were strong words from the president about something he has been concerned about for quite some time. And yet again, we saw this horror play out in Buffalo, and now we learn that that was the motivation, the fear, the hate, and certainly white supremacy.
David, I think there is no question that this is the strongest condemnation yet from Joe Biden since he took office against the hate, the racist hate that is ripping this country apart. You heard him label this a racist rampage and calling it out for what it is. Terrorism, calling, as you know, white supremacy a poison. And what is really remarkable here is that President Biden directly called out the members of the media and those in the political sphere that are allowing this hate to fester. The president calling out those who are allowing this kind of hate to radicalize individuals through the internet into believing this kind of fringe racist replacement theory that was espoused by the alleged shooter in Buffalo. And the president saying that those who spread lies for power, political gain, and profit must be called out, must stop, because of course it is the diversity of this country, as the president noted, that makes it so strong. And I think the history here is important to remember, as you noted, President Biden was inspired to run for office because he heard those chants, those racist chants of those marching through Charlottesville, Virginia. This was at the core of President Biden's campaign, and his critics have said that he has not so far taken enough action on this, that he hasn't used his bully pulpit, his microphone, the power of the presidency, and his political weight to call this out. Today, he is taking very direct steps to address that criticism and try to begin a really impossible task of, as president, directing and trying to respond to hate and to heal what is still very clearly a very broken country, David.
Mary Bruce watching this from the White House. Mary, our thanks to you. And just to underscore what Mary pointed out there, the president taking this much further here today, his condemnation of this kind of hate that we're witnessing in parts of this country, obviously concerned about the far reaches of the internet, fringe groups, but also today signaling that he is also holding accountable those in the media, those in politics who are using this for power, political gain, and for profit, as Mary said moments ago. I want to bring in Stephanie Ramos, who is in Buffalo. Stephanie, you and I were on the ground there this weekend, and just 24 hours ago, as we learned even more about this suspect who had been there the day before and months ago, planning this out in awful detail, and this document that was online. There are so many questions about flags that were missed or perhaps ignored. Those questions for the authorities in the weeks and months to come. But today is about the people of Buffalo hearing from their president and first lady that they will work to end the hate.
Definitely, David. It was so important for the people of this community to see the president here in Buffalo, to hear him talk about the victims. These were people that were doing everyday things. As the president said, a man stopped here to pick up some snacks, another father stopping here to pick up cupcakes for his son's birthday, and that 86-year-old woman who had just visited her husband at a nursing home just a few blocks away from here, stopping here to pick up a few items. Her son telling us that he just hasn't had the heart to tell his dad that his wife of 68 years was shot and killed at the grocery store in a senseless act. We've spoken to so many people here on the ground, David, as you have as well, and they are angry, they're in shock, they're traumatized, they're sad, but one thing has been consistent here: they don't want this to happen again. One gentleman that we spoke to a few blocks away from here says he just cannot believe that this gunman targeted their grocery store. And it's not just a grocery store to this community. This is like their community center. This is their hub, and one of the only grocery stores on the east side of Buffalo. He is still in shock so many days after, and he just wants change. I can tell you that a lot of the folks that we spoke to welcomed the idea of the president visiting here. They wanted to see him, and they wanted to see that he found it as important as they did to come here and tell them he's going to try his best to pass legislation so that this doesn't happen again here in Buffalo. David.
Stephanie Ramos in Buffalo. Stephanie, of course, our thanks to you again today, and we'll see a little bit later this afternoon. And as Stephanie points out, this was a grocery store where people came, said hello to one another, exchanged pleasantries with the workers who they came to know over time. You're looking at some of the faces of those who were lost in that community. And as we said last night on the news, it's so important in a moment like this to put the suspect aside, the investigation aside, and just honor the people who were lost. These were proud citizens of Buffalo. They were committed to their churches, dedicated to their families, and so many of them gave so much to their community. The power of those pictures. Our coverage will continue here on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. I'll be back with the entire team a little later here for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. Until then, good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
And we've just seen an emotional President Biden running through the names of the victims in the Buffalo supermarket mass shooting. The president is there in Buffalo, New York, calling the shooting a racist act of terrorism, but promising that hate will not prevail and white supremacy will not have the last word in this country. I want to go to Kenneth Moten, who's in Washington, D.C., keeping an eye on all this for us. Kenneth, we saw the president starting to get tearing up as he started running through the names of the victims, as well as brief descriptions of who they were and their contribution to their communities. We know that he met with their families earlier today. What do we know about those meetings?
Well, Diane, we expect to hear a little bit more about what happened inside that community center as President Biden essentially wrapped his arms around him, I'm sure physically wrapped his arms around those victims' families, those 10 victims' families that were who are just still suffering right now and going through and grieving, mourning the loss of their loved ones who went to the grocery store to run an errand, to get some food, to get cupcakes for their child's birthday party, and then they did not come home. We know that action is key, Diane, but words matter, which is why we heard the president say, "I stand with you." He said, as he honored the victims, going through each victim's name, their ages, because it is important for the president to say their names, saying evil will not win, hate will not prevail, that white supremacy will not have the last word. It was the most forceful condemnation of white supremacy that we've heard from this president since he took office. And it's all because of the fact that this 18-year-old white man drove 200 miles to Buffalo, New York, to the east side of Buffalo, to this predominantly black community, which has nearly 80% people of color there in that community. And he opened fire at the only grocery store they have there on a busy Saturday morning. The president condemning those who spread these lies that led to radicalizing this not only young man, but so many across this country who perpetrate these types of crimes, these mass killings. And he said, calling out those who profit, who for political gain, who for power, say this rhetoric that goes and then radicalizes these people. Again, the president saying white supremacy is a poison. It has no place in America. The president, Diane, saying, what is he going to do? What are his next steps? What is his plan of action? He says we can keep assault weapons off the streets. He said we can address the exploitation of the internet to recruit and radicalize as well. We saw the president earlier today with the First Lady praying at that memorial at Tops Market. That growing memorial, we see there laying flowers as well. He spoke with law enforcement, community leaders, and others as they try to figure out not only, heal this community, but talk about next steps.
And Stephanie, I want to go to Stephanie Ramos, who's there at the scene. Stephanie, as Kenneth pointed out, we heard the president saying that white supremacy is a poison. He says it's running through our body politic. And he called on Americans everywhere to voice that the ideology of white supremacy has no place in America. So what do we know at this point about the suspect's motive and mindset going into this?
Well, authorities are definitely saying that he was radicalized, clearly online. They've found documents, one document where all of his messages that he had posted on a website, all of that compiled into this one document. So they're collecting evidence still. Of course, they're looking at surveillance video from when he came to visit this area back in March and then again on Friday. Also, authorities went to his home to collect evidence there, speaking with his parents. But it seems as though prosecutors are really focusing on his social media activity and looking at those posts and those messages to see when this started and why this wasn't discovered earlier, why there were so many red flags, why this wasn't addressed earlier before he made the trip here and did what he did at this supermarket. So authorities clearly still trying to collect all of the evidence that they can in this investigation, and which will most likely result in additional charges. Right now, he's been charged with just one count of first-degree murder, an initial count, so that's likely to go up. Diane.
And I want to bring in Mary Bruce, who's at the White House for us. Mary, we heard the president talking here not only about white supremacy, but also talking about gun legislation. What power does the White House have at this point to try to do something if Congress doesn't?
Not a whole lot. Look, I think the president so far has taken some steps unilaterally. We've seen him taking steps to try and tackle ghost guns, those sort of at-home kits that can be used to make firearms. He's in many ways sort of exhausted all of the executive actions he can take, because the reality is there's only so much a president can do unless Congress takes action. And we have had this conversation, unfortunately, many, many times. After every mass shooting, there is a lot of attention put on Washington and what Washington will and won't do on this issue. And despite repeated attempts by Democrats in Washington. There has been some legislation that has passed the House that would expand background checks, put in place other safeguards. The political reality is that there simply is no appetite from Republicans in Congress to enact stricter gun reforms, anything that would be considered meaningful, I think, by many advocates who are calling for this change. What people are urging the president to do is to do more of what you saw today, for him to really shine a light on this, for him to use his political power, the heft of the presidency, to really pressure Congress to do more. But the numbers simply are not there. And I think there is, unfortunately, a sense of resignation in Washington that when it comes to gun violence, there's very little that Washington is really going to be able to do realistically to enact more meaningful reforms. That is simply where the politics of this issue stand. Diane.
And ABC News contributor, former FBI agent Brad Garrett is with us now as well. Brad, New York Governor Kathy Hochul talked about how the suspected shooter underwent a psychiatric evaluation after he made threats against his high school last year. We know after that evaluation, he was released. No charges were filed. The governor today said that there was not a specific threat or something that seemed to be actionable. That's how she described what happened. But of course, here we are now. So are there lessons learned from a law enforcement perspective to try to prevent things like that? And do you see an opportunity for that?
Certainly there is. I mean, this kid displayed all sorts of red flags, even going back to the event you just described. Okay, so he goes to court. They don't charge him with anything. He has an evaluation. They let him go. That, Diane, is where the system falls apart, in that we don't keep track of people. In other words, if you have somebody that threatens to commit a murder, but not specific, and then maybe commit suicide, we're talking about somebody obviously very troubled. And if they're thinking that way, as they get away from school, where there's less sort of oversight of them, it's the big concern as to what they will do. Nicholas Cruz is another example in Parkland. He was out of high school. Nobody was really keeping track of him, and he was deteriorating, becoming more depressed, more angry, etc. And he even talked about committing a school shooting. This kid obviously talked a lot online about what he was about to do. But the key here, I think, is we have to do follow-up systems with people. We have to go have informal conversations with, like, this kid. Well, what are you up to? Have you acquired any weapons, or why did you acquire any weapons? Now, he could buy weapons illegally, so these are going to be informal conversations, but the key is you have to keep track of people. Not every one of them will go out and commit a mass shooting or harm somebody, but that's really the key, because I'm very realistic about we're not going to change the gun laws or the background investigations anytime soon, and so you have to work within the parameters that you have, and we do have that.
All right, Brad, thank you. And let's go to ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Katersky. Aaron, investigators have been trying to piece together the timeline leading up to this shooting. We know that they spoke to the suspect's parents. We also, ABC News, spoke with one of the suspect's friends who saw him the day before. What do we know about that, and what's the latest on that general timeline right now?
Well, the friend told us that the suspect, Peyton Gendron, had dropped off a box of ammunition before the shooting. They're not sure exactly what that's about, but when the family kind of realized what had happened, they called the authorities. The authorities came to collect the ammunition. And he also painted a picture of someone who was his friend. It said that Gendron was not someone that he thought would be violent, did like guns and talking about ammunition and tactical gear and body armor, but not someone that he outright thought would actually be violent. In addition to going to his friend's house, he also appears on Friday to have driven the 200 miles from the Binghamton area here to Buffalo, and the authorities are still trying to figure out everywhere he went and where he may have slept overnight before the murderous rampage on Saturday. And I was struck, Diane, by something the president said, where he called out not just white supremacy generally, but replacement theory, conspiracy theory specifically, because he said that young people are being convinced and radicalized online into believing that they're being replaced. And that is what law enforcement officials say happened with Peyton Gendron. He was an adherent of this false racist conspiracy theory that white people are being taken over, replaced by people of color. And that's why part of the timeline as law enforcement has come to learn, seem to include not only this grocery store, but also a drive down Jefferson Avenue behind me to shoot at any black person he could see.
So I want to go to Attorney Bernarda Villalona on that point, because Bernarda, the suspect, despite everything that Aaron just laid out, has pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. Now close relatives of the shooter are using COVID-19 as a defense. They're saying the 18-year-old shooter likely snapped because of his COVID-19 paranoia. Could that stand up in court?
Absolutely not. I find that to be laughable. One, it's not one that's recognized by the courts or the criminal system, so I doubt that it will even be presented or be allowed to be presented as a defense, because you counter it with how meticulous this man was, the planning, how every detail up to the point of what underwear he's going to wear, the location, the research, the manifesto, the ammunition that he had. It was just so much that goes to show you that only a sane person could have put something like that together. So let's not blame it on mental health. Let's blame it that this man had hatred in his heart and wanted to do away with others.
All right, Bernarda Villalona, Brad Garrett, Kenneth Moten, Stephanie Ramos, Mary Bruce, and Aaron Katersky. Thank you all. And thank you for watching. I'm Diane Macedo. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis after this.
We know who we are, where we come from, and where we belong.
This is the story of how we lived, how we survived for thousands of years.
We're still maintaining our culture, and we're fighting for it, generation after generation.
It's important to pass these skills on.
We make it work